Hello. This is Kim Ades, and you are joining us today at the Frame of Mind Coaching Podcast. And I'm actually very excited to be introducing you this guest, my co-host. His name is Chef Shawn Bucher from New Mexico. He's in Albuquerque. Chef Shawn, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I saw the fact that you published a book, and I got really excited about the subject matter in the book. And I thought this is really an interesting topic. So let me kind of go back. As everybody knows, I have 5 kids. One of them, Louis, a lot of you have heard of Louis. Louis works in Montreal, and he's working at one of the top restaurants in Canada. And he's been, over the past 3-4 years, been kind of working his way up the process. But I've been watching how he has been experiencing life in a restaurant. And I have to say, it's been hard. It's been difficult, all the way from being on his feet from 14 to 16 hours a day, to being in a stifling hot kitchen in the middle of summer where the temperature in the kitchen is like 53 degrees Celsius, that's hot, to literal abuse. Not to mention he has a series of burns on his arms, and it's just insane. And he's getting paid next to nothing. And so when I saw that Shawn wrote this book, Shawn, what's the name of your book?
My book is called Food People Management.
I thought to myself, I need to talk to this guy because I need to understand his perspective. And my drive is, how do you change this industry? Because my son Louis isn't the only one who's experienced some of this stuff. So Shawn, you have not only experience writing books, but you have a ton of experience in the restaurant industry. Can you please share?
Yeah, so I've been in this industry for almost 25 years now. I started out in grocery stores, moved into arenas and kind of large volume feeding, and then kind of went back into restaurants, and then into even some of the different spaces like healthcare, college, university. I spent a lot of time almost in every segment of the industry, and a lot of the challenges you're talking about, they're not unique to just restaurants. And that was part of what gave birth, so to speak, to this book, or this idea that there needs to be some sort of management tool specifically for people in food, because some of the challenges in the hospitality industry are kind of unique to some of the other industries or businesses out there, where those businesses, it might be more of a 9-to-5, whereas hospitality is 24/7. Especially if you're working in some of those hotels and places that are catering to people in off hours, you're generally working when others want to play. So nights, weekends, holidays, and a lot of those things just can really weigh on you. And it's already a difficult business as it is. But then you throw in basically terrible managers that don't know how to manage, and you're just compounded into kind of a no-win situation, which really isn't helped by what the Food Network has done. The Food Network has done a lot of good things for this industry, but it's also given some very unrealistic expectations. I was a culinary instructor for a couple of years, and I kid you not, 50% of the kids that walked through that door said, I don't really need to know some of this stuff because I'm going to be on the Food Network and I'm going to have my own show. And your first thought is, well, yeah, you and 20 million other people,
right.
It just doesn't work like that. But, there's just kind of this false sense of hope that was given to people that, well, hey, I can just walk in and I can wear normal street clothes and I can, make a few cool things and they're going to pay me millions of dollars. So I don't really need to know how to break down a chicken. I don't really need to know how to make a stock. And
right.
So it was interesting. So, a lot of challenges came from that too. Our clientele became much more educated as to ingredients and options for dishes that were out there, but they also kind of had this idea that it was all glitz and glamour. It wasn't exactly, the dirty, hot mess that it can be.
Right. So I want to kind of go into a little bit of the nitty gritty. So, and then I want to hear your approach. I want to hear how you think the food industry could be doing a better job managing teams and individuals on their team. But let's just look at something very, very simple. The pay and I'm not talking about the pay that servers get because they're getting tips, right? But the pay that
The back of the house
staff
staff
of
kind
the
of
house
thing.
gets, and then the hours, the
Hmm.
pay and the hours. Like, like uh, I have never seen an industry where working 12, 14 hours a day every single day is normal.
Yeah, well, it's challenging because, like I said, the nature of the beast is that you are serving when everyone wants to play, and so you have a lunch rush, but then you've got to get ready for a dinner rush, and sometimes that dinner rush can last until 8, 9, 10 o'clock. You just never quite know when it's going to be, because one night you might have 3 or 4 couples come through the door at 8 o'clock, and then the next night you have a whole tour bus show up,
Right.
and you just never know when those things are going to happen. So a lot of times the business is very reactive versus proactive. A lot of businesses can be more proactive, but hospitality in general has always been very reactive because of those variables right there where you just don't know.
So when you say proactive, is that like a marketing problem so that we can forecast sales? Like, I mean, when we're reactive, what you're describing is, hey, we don't know what's going to come in from day to day. But if I'm more proactive with my marketing, then I know that I can fill 80% of the house every single day. Is that a business problem,
I,
or
I
is that an eating problem?
I, I think it's both. I think, well, here's the challenge is that, we as customers or clientele, we're pretty fickle at times, where we don't really know what we want, but we know we're hungry. And so we want to come in and we want to pour over the menu for a long time. And we may or may not want something, or it comes out and it wasn't the way we wanted, and so then we send it back. And so there's some challenges there, but I think a lot of the issue, the heart of the issue that we're talking about right now, as far as being proactive versus reactive, really comes down to knowing what your numbers are and being able to forecast the way that you need to. Now, with restaurants, generally, when it comes to forecasting, you have to look at your past sales. You have to look at last year, last month, last week, whatever it might be, and try to guess, essentially. But a lot of times some of the variables are, maybe there's a concert in town, or some of those things come into play too. But you can also be very proactive with that. The challenge with the industry is kind of twofold in that regard, where you need to be proactive, but where do you find the time to be proactive if you're constantly just putting out fires and constantly just being reactive? And that's the challenge, and that's really what separates the good from the great, so to speak. The really well done or well run management teams are generally very proactive, and they spend the extra time and effort, and they base things on systems. And that's more or less what I kind of wrote the book around, is that a lot of times we try to base our operations on people, specific individuals. Well, so-and-so shows up every day, and so I'm going to run my business around him because I know he's going to show up every day.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of setting up a system and then trying to follow that system, or trying to teach that system to other people so that you have that level of consistency. But again, it's kind of the hope with the book was to really give people a standard, or a system or a formula that they could really manage by, that would get them out of that vicious cycle.
Okay, so let's talk about, again, let's go back to the hours. So in other industries, for example, in manufacturing industries, when the factory's working 24 hours a day, there are 3 shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Normal, but not in the restaurant industry. So is that what you mean by systems, or is it simply that there aren't enough margins to accommodate that kind of structure?
Well, there's definitely not margins. Generally speaking, when it comes to food service or hospitality, you have a 30-30-30-10 kind of breakdown: 30% labor, 30% food, 30% overhead, and then 10% profit. The challenge with that is that, you have some of these other aspects in play. So if it's a franchise and you're paying franchise fees,
Right.
that kind of skews things too. And so there's so many variables with it that, honestly, look, as someone looking from the outside in, and as a consultant myself, I have to I have to critically think about things, and I have to look at things and try to take a step back. Most of the time when I look at restaurants, especially basic restaurant management, I think anybody who gets into this business is insane, because it's very, very difficult. There's so many variables, there's so many different challenges, because essentially you have all these businesses rolled into one. You are a manufacturing business, but you're manufacturing on the fly as someone shows up and says, this is what I want. So you don't always know exactly how many widgets to have on hand, because you don't know how many people are going to buy them. And so you run out, and then you make people mad, and et cetera, et cetera. But then you've also got kind of this HR issue where, it's great to have people show up and work these set hours, but then when someone else doesn't show up, but food still has to get out, people just, they react, and they say, yeah, I'll stay for an extra 15 minutes, and the extra 15 minutes becomes 2 hours. It's hard, because this business is not, it's not full of college graduates. Let's be honest. It's full of more people that have to work in the industry than necessarily want to. They're not always the people that have gone to school and have said, this is what I want to do my whole life.
Right.
They maybe have made some mistakes, or they maybe have not furthered themselves the way that they had hoped to. And now they're in a situation where they have to work for tips, and they have to do these things just to survive. That's a very different mindset right there. And it's very hard to encourage and motivate those type of people that feel like they have to be there versus want to be there. So that in and of itself is a challenge.
So when you talk about systems, like what do you propose? How do you propose to handle, the uniqueness of this industry? The fact that we can't forecast that easily, the fact that we can't have 3 shifts, the fact that we are putting, long hours on people and really not paying them a whole lot.
Yeah, it's, again, you'd be insane to really want to get into this business. But I'm one of those people that is very passionate about what I do, and I love it, and I understand some of the unique challenges in it. Now, in the book, I talk about a basic formula, or a basic system that I have, that I've managed my teams by, that's been very, very good over the years. And that is basically standards plus accountability times consistency equals success.
Say that again, one more time.
Standards plus accountability times consistency equals success. Okay. So when I talk about standards, I'm talking about everything from, this is how you take out the trash, to when you punch in, this is what I expect. You don't punch in and then go get dressed. You get dressed and then you punch in and you start working.
Okay.
It's those types of things. But then you have to have that accountability piece too, because you can set the best standards or the best expectations in the world, but then if you're not holding people accountable to following those things, you're not going to be successful. But the third part comes into play along with that, because you have to be consistent in doing all that. There's times where it gets busy and there's a huge rush and we're being reactive, and it's hard to be as consistent of a manager in those times than we are when we've got maybe a little bit of downtime. Mm-hmm. But that's really what separates the good from the great, is people who are able to be consistent in those moments, who, a lot of times it's a very emotional business where.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Where all of a sudden, you're on top of the world and things are going great. And the next thing you know, somebody gets mad at you and this isn't what I ordered, or this isn't cooked right, and how dare you, and you're a terrible person. And all of a sudden it just like drains all the drive that you had, and you just kind of, oh man. And so then that puts you in a negative state of mind. And then all of a sudden it's kind of like, well, I don't care. Let's just get through it, kind of thing. And so it's learning that emotional maturity also as a manager, to be able to set the tone for the rest of your team. And that's where I think a lot of people really struggle, is that that basically the leadership or the management who is there really sets the tone for that shift. Now, if you have somebody who is level-headed and inspiring and really, really cares about what they're doing and can help inspire that team, chances are you're going to have a great shift, and chances are that people are going to want to show up to work, and you're not going to have to worry about covering those things. But when the leadership is not up to par and leadership is really struggling just to keep it together themselves,
Right.
that's where it struggles and it affects everyone else.
Okay, so go back, because you gave me lots to work with here. So number one, let's go back to this whole concept of accountability. So you say you come in, you get dressed, you punch in. Well, what happens if a person doesn't do that? Is there a consequence? How do you create consistency? Like, what's the course of action when someone's not following the procedure or the standard that you laid out?
Well, I think I've always followed the 3-strike rule, verbal warning, written warning, and sorry, that's your last chance kind of warning.
Okay, but you're short staffed. Like, you need this person. You're just going to kick them out because they got dressed first?
Well, that's where a lot of people think, well, I can't do that because then I'm going to be short staffed. But what I've found is it's like ripping a Band-Aid off. You have to do that 2 or 3 times to set a tone for everyone to see that you're serious and that you're going to follow through on those things. And then all of a sudden, when people see that you're serious and they know that there's going to be repercussions, they're gonna perform. And so in my experience, what it's been in the past is that, yes, there's been times where people have not lived up to standards and I've had to get rid of them. And then I've had to fill in for them for those shifts to make sure that things went well. But that's part of what leading in this business is that we have to understand, number one, what we're getting into. We have to understand that it's not going to be a 9 to 5, and we have to understand that there's going to be those times. But to your point, I think that you've got to be able to communicate certain things to your team too. And that's where a lot of the challenge comes in, is that we feel like we've communicated, but we haven't. So, if I come to somebody and I say, the standard is this, you punch in, right as the time starts, even if you have to stand by the clock, I want you to, right at 9 o'clock, I want you to punch in at that time, not 9:01 and 8:59, 9 o'clock. But if I say, get here before your shift and punch in, that's very interpretive. But again, because we are reacting a lot of times, we say, yeah, just make sure you punch in on time. Well, on time can be relative to a lot of different people.
Right.
My wife is on time if she's 30 minutes late. So it's,
right.
you just have to, you have to kind of play into those things.
Okay. So I want to go, because this is a great conversation. So, in the restaurant industry, there's the whole yes chef concept, the whole yes chef
mentality. Yes.
So there's this high level of respect that's not necessarily reciprocated the other way, right? Like, chefs aren't always, let's call it, the most diplomatic, or aren't the most.
They're very emotional beings, yes, they're drill sergeants in some cases.
So what are your thoughts on that? Is that the right way to be? Is that consistent with your, accountability rule, 3 strikes, you're out? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it comes down to individuals. Now, in the book, I talk a lot about becoming the type of leader you want to follow, and what kind of leader do you want to follow? Because everybody is going to have a perspective there too, where there might be people out there who love the drill sergeant tactic, who love being able to, that yes chef and thank you, and I will absolutely do that. But then there's others who want a little bit more, flexibility. There's others who want it to be totally laid back. There's got to be a middle ground in there. Now, I believe that the greatest or the broadest stroke leader, so to speak, would be a servant leader, somebody who is there and understands their role is to serve and to be a part of things, in as much as they're there to get things done for the team, or to help the team succeed, getting them the right tools. Now, that doesn't mean that you jump in and you do the job, but it also means that most chefs that I worked with coming up, I worked with a lot of European chefs, a lot of chefs that were classically trained, and if you didn't do it right, they threw a pan at you or whatever.
Right.
Now that's
they call you names, right?
Absolutely, and they're degrading, and that's not inspiring at all. But see, that was kind of how they came up. Now the tide has really changed, because I look at Hell's Kitchen, for example. There is no way that he would get away with, some of that stuff.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I have seen firsthand that
Oh
chefs
yeah,
get away with that stuff. And
they
it's
do.
shocking to me. Like I think, I don't know, what is it? The labor board should be involved in
and
some of
they
this stuff.
and they are getting involved more, and those chefs are getting fired. See, that's the thing, is that you come with like the Mario Batalis and some of the scandals that have happened in the last few years with some of these television chefs, and all of a sudden they lose those multi-million-dollar TV contracts, and they get kicked out of their businesses. I mean, Mario Batali was basically kicked out of his restaurants because of some of his antics. And so it's becoming the new standard is to not be that. Now, the other reason that is that there are so many other options out there. It used to be that you worked in a hotel or a restaurant. Well, nowadays, people can go work for food brokers, they can go work for food distributors, they can go do all these different things in all these different places, and they don't have to take the abuse. And because there's a war on talent out there, essentially, I mean, I kid you not, there's not a food service establishment that I know of right now that is staffed to where it needs to be, because people, they look at this and they think, why would I go, get all this abuse for very little pay? Like, that makes no
Yeah.
sense to me. And so they don't go into the business. And they're the type of people that are going and being smarter about their careers and getting educated and doing things where they don't have to take that abuse. Now, taking a step back, those chefs are starting to realize that, man, I can only work so many 14, 16, 18-hour days before I start to burn out. And I can't be successful unless I have a team behind me.
Right.
And how do I build a team? And so if you look at the really great restaurateurs and the really great chefs out there, they have entire teams behind them that follow them. And now, it doesn't mean that the Emeril Lagasse's and Wolfgang Pucks, they're not in their restaurants every day, but they're in there. They still go in, they still spend time there. But when they go in there, they're leading and they're inspiring and they're asking their teams, what do you need from me? How can I help you be successful? Which is very different than the drill sergeant mentality of, you will do this or else.
Right. Okay. So you said something earlier that piqued my interest. You said that a lot of the chefs don't have the emotional maturity.
Amen.
and they are reactive. Okay, so how do we help chefs build emotional maturity? This is my field, right? Like, I run a company called Frame of Mind Coaching. It's all about your mindset. It's all about your emotional maturity. It's all about your resilience. It's all about that. 100% of super successful business owners have a very strong mindset, and that's really what you're talking about. So how do you help people stay calm when things are crazy? When things are chaotic? How do you still stay inspiring when everything's going, down the drain? So what do you recommend?
I think you have to have a vision. You have to have an understanding of what you want it to look like, or what it needs to be like to really support that team. So if you're designated as the leader, if you're the chef, the executive chef, whatever role you might have, the general manager, whatever position or title you might have, if you are the designated leader, it's up to you to take the time to become emotionally mature and to become that critical thinker and that person that knows that they need to be even keel, or they need to be that type of individual to lead. And that's why I talk about servant leadership, is that until you are the type of leader that is going to serve your team and is going to be that beacon, that lighthouse, that person that people gravitate towards, you can have all the standards and accountability in the world, but if people don't respect you, then they're not going to follow you. And so it's really up to individuals to take the time to become that type of person so that they can then lead those teams.
Right. So also you need to figure out how to walk the talk.
Amen.
Amen. Right. So I have a theory. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, I keep talking to my son about this, because we talk about, like, what kind of restaurant do you want to open? What's going to look like? And I think, like, hey, there are so many moving parts in a restaurant. Like, there's food ordering, there's staffing, there's bringing in the people, there's making sure the front of the house is operational, there's looking at your numbers, there's looking at your profit margins. Like, there's so many moving parts. Let's make food not such a big moving part. Like, let's not get so complicated and fancy. Let's just get really good at one thing, or, like a small menu, and focus on that. Let's not
Oh,
make food so complex.
I
What are
love
your
it.
thoughts?
I love it. I mean, that's straight out of my playbook. I tell my clients this all the time because it's what I like to call menu creep, where you start out with, we're going to do 10 things and we're going to do them phenomenally and we're going to be consistent at it. And they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then I come back a month, 2 months, 3 months later, and all of a sudden it's up to 16 things. And I'm like, guys, what happened? Didn't we have it? Well, no, we were just thinking, and we should be able to do this and this and this. And I have to go back to, look, when I was a chef at a hotel, I had a general manager who was inspiring and absolutely taught me a lot of things. Well, he was the food and beverage manager, but he would always say, look, if you can manage this, then I'll give you a chance to manage this.
Right.
But you're not going to manage this until you can manage this. And that's exactly where I think we go wrong a lot of times, is that we feel like we have to be everything to everyone instead of really dialing down into, like, who is it that we want to be, having that vision. Once we have that vision of what do we want to be? Well, I want to be the best restaurant in this town or on this street or whatever it is. Well, what defines that criteria? What does best mean? Is it best Yelp reviews, best Google reviews, Michelin stars? Like what is the barometers for those? And so you really have to get very specific on those things. But I totally agree with you that if you can start small and you learn how to manage something and you set up your systems around that, then it's very easy to add to it. But it's very, very difficult to start with 20 things and then do them kind of okay and not really get a following or clientele, and then have to go back and start over again. That's why so many businesses fail in this regard, is because you have all these different people with all these different ideas that feel like they have to be everything to everyone. But then you look at these little food trucks that serve one or two things and people are lined up out the doors for them. Why? Because it's quality, it's consistency, and those people are passionate about what they do.
Right.
They don't go build 5,000 square foot restaurants right off the bat. They start with a 200 square foot truck, and then all of a sudden they're off to the races, and they build upon that. So
I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. Okay, I have two more questions. Number one is, like, so what do you do? Are you like in the kitchen all day? Are you consulting? Like, what is your thing now?
Well, I'm all over the place. So I, at 29 years old, had to have back surgery because I had spent almost 15 years in the kitchen at that point.
I want you to talk to my son so badly. Okay, continue.
I absolutely will. Yeah, L4, L5 laminotomy. I had to have a back surgery when I was 29. And I thought, this is not a sustainable all day, every day on concrete floors lifestyle. I want to, as my kids get older, I want to be able to do things with them. I don't want to be the guy on the sidelines.
How did you even have kids while you were in a kitchen?
I don't know, very carefully. Anyway, it was one of those challenges where I had to recreate my entire career because all of a sudden I couldn't do what I had always done. And so I went back to school and I became a culinary instructor. And as I was in teaching culinary school, I got bored, to be honest with you, because you can only teach the same class 3, 4, half a dozen times before it's like, it just gets old. And so consulting was a natural next step for me, because as instructors, we were always getting phone calls. Well, you teach culinary school, you must know what you're talking about. And so people would call and, can you help me with my restaurant or whatever. And I carved out a little bit of a niche for myself because I saw an opportunity, and I had a great mentor in this who helped me see that equipment was a great avenue, because a lot of people would buy equipment but not really know how to use it. And so I really was very fortunate and got on with a couple of equipment manufacturers and was able to support the clients that they had by kind of doing this third party training and whatnot. And while I was doing that, I gravitated more towards healthcare because, again, quality of life. Healthcare is very different because, it's more 9 to 5, it's more bureaucratic. You've got, these big organizations that have incredible benefits. And so there was always this persona, or always this stigma with healthcare in the past because it was hospital food. Nobody wants to be associated with hospital food.
Right.
Well, nowadays it's much different. You've got these university teaching hospitals are doing incredible things. I mean, one of my clients is 3D printing texture modified foods. Instead of just pureeing it in a
Wow.
blender, they're 3D printing carrots that are pureed, and it's very
Wow.
cool stuff.
Is it edible?
Oh yeah, it's made out of carrots. It's just
Wow.
pureed carrots, but it's
Wow.
3D printed to look like a carrot. It's very cool.
Interesting. Okay.
But anyway, so I started working more in that regard. But then I also was so passionate about restaurants and food service in general. And I loved the creativity and flexibility, because with healthcare, it's very, you have to kind of really engineer a lot of the food, fat and salt and sugar, you kind of want to stay away from. And so I wanted to have my feet in both realms, where I could kind of throw caution to the wind and do whatever people really wanted to eat. And then I could be more or more niche or more specific in really creating food that people were very it was healing. It was really making a difference in their lives. And so I keep my hand in both things. So I'm a consultant primarily. So there are times where I am sitting around a table and we're creating menus, or writing job flows, or designing kitchens. I do a lot of design work, and then the other part of it is when what we call go live, when it's ready to, the rubber meets the road and we're ready to open the doors. I'm on my feet 15, 16 hours a day, standing right next to them, making sure that things go right. But that's only for a week or two at a time. It's not for the next 5 or 6 years. So that's one of the things that I've kind of carved a niche out for myself. And
okay, so I'm going to add in, and we call it niche here in Canada, but I'm going to add something to your agenda that I think is really highly needed. And maybe I'm going to send you your first client. It's these up and coming chefs who look at their career and say, like, how do I manage it all? How do I live this way? How do I work so many hours? How do I get married and have a family? How do I take my car to get repaired because I'm so tired by the end of the week? Like, how do I do this? So, coaching those serious up and coming chefs and saying, like, is this the only way? Or if this is the way, how do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to send you your first client.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I want to add that, a lot of these ideas are not unique to me, because you look at someone like Danny Meyer at Union Square Hospitality. They're pioneering things like, the no tips for servers and 4-day work weeks. And, some of these things that are really, really needed in our industry. And I'm glad to see that someone is really seeing that and taking the bull by the horns. Because Shake Shack is hundreds of locations now, and can you imagine the impact that they would have on that industry, going to a 4-day work week and potentially being able to set the standard for other concepts? I think that's what's needed, is you have to have these people that just actually do it.
Yeah. Okay, so show us your book one more time.
Ta-da!
Food People Management. Where do they find it? Where do they get it?
Barnes & Noble, Amazon, it's everywhere. So Barnes & Noble and Amazon are the easiest.
Do you think some of these concepts can be applied to other industries?
Oh, absolutely. I think the management formula, standards plus accountability times consistency, I think can be applied to almost anything in our lives, even creating the life that you want to have for yourself. If you have visions and you have, I talk a lot about how belief leads to action.
You're talking my language.
No, I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of things in here that, because I'm very familiar with, I do my homework too, so I'm very familiar with what you do, and there's a lot of the graphics and things in this book that I was like, well, yeah, this absolutely can go to a lot of those different things. See that?
Hold it up a little closer.
You can see that.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that can transfer to other things, but I try to use real life examples from food service to really niche down to our food service people.
So for me personally, I need your book and I need to talk to you after we're done. But in the meantime, again, you have a website. Where can people find you?
Probably the easiest one, I do a weekly podcast called the Business Chef Podcast, where we talk to people around the food service industry about different challenges that they're having. I also try to interview a wide variety of chefs and food service professionals so that people can see really what's possible in their careers. You know, really, when it comes to your career, you've got to try a lot of different things, especially in this business, because there are so many options. But really, when you get your feet wet in a lot of these different things, that's when you kind of see what you gravitate towards.
So where do we find you?
Businesschef.org. That's the
businesschef.org. Okay, guys, find it. Find Chef Shawn Bucher. Buy his book, read it. I think that there are lots of interesting lessons in this book that can easily be applied to other service-based industries or other industries, period. Take a look. Shawn, thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Thank you.
It's really interesting talking to you. I'm excited that there are people like you in the restaurant industry. I'm so happy. I wish that there were a million of you in all countries, cities, states, whatever, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. And I wish there were too, because then this industry wouldn't have such a bad name.
I know. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.